Now, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another photo mishmash. This one being broadcast live April 10th, 2019. And as usual, I'm joined by my good friend and co-host, Steve Skurch. Steve, how are you doing today?
Good. I am doing great. My knee-jerk reaction is always to say, how is everybody out there doing? But how are you doing? Answer in the chat room.
Yeah, that's right. I love that we do the show live. It's a lot of fun to have you all, chat room people, join us each week. We got a packed show this week. We've got tips for sharper images. I'm working on a full video, but Steve and I are going to be sharing some of our favorites with you. We've got some news about the camera industry that's not so good. And despite that news, Canon has just announced the third generation of a product I didn't think we were going to get the second generation of. That shows how well of a prognosticator I am. We've got a bunch of other stuff, and including the very first picture of a hole. So stay tuned for all of that. It's pretty exciting.
Now, in your defense, though, Toby, who is actually great at predicting what Canon's going to come out with?
Yeah, not too many people. Not too many people at all. Even Canon Rumors gets it wrong fairly often. But in their defense, they're just trying to generate traffic. So getting it wrong is just as good as getting it right in most cases. Although I guess if you continually have a negative track record, maybe people stop reading, watching. They'll be like, that guy, he doesn't know what he's talking about. I'm talking about myself. Yeah. Well, the thing is, sometimes I think people who have time on their hand spend a good bit of time dreaming up rumors, dreaming up and creating mock-ups of really kind of convincing cameras. And then, if you get that stuff sent to you anonymously, it can be quite compelling and be like, ooh, this might be true. Let me share it.
Yeah, there's a guy that I follow on YouTube, and it's for Apple products. And he's always every time he talks about something, it's as if it's actually happening. And I've learned over the last couple of years that he's just kind of taken every rumor that you see out there and just explaining it as if it's fact. And then he just retracts it later on. Like, nah, I guess I was wrong on, or guess so-and-so was wrong on that one. And never really seems to apologize for it. But, such is the nature of our news today.
Yeah, and that's, that is fairly disappointing. I mean, that in long term, I think that's quite concerning. I mean, it's one thing when we're talking about this product or that product, but we could go down a very deep, dark philosophical discussion. So let's stop. Let's take a sip from our Boba Fett mug.
Oh, man. I think my days of drinking out of the Obi-Wan and Chewie mugs might be over, because I drank water out of that a couple weeks ago, and it was really fun to show those off. I've still got them. I kept them up here in my office on display. They're kind of cool looking, but I washed them beforehand, but I don't know, man. 1977 mugs that have just been sitting around forever. Something weird about drinking clean water out of that.
1977. That was a good year for water. Yeah, for sure.
It's like fill it with a garden hose and go on your way.
Yeah, I bet that was. Yeah, I can understand that. I could understand that. Let's, if you haven't figured it out now, if you haven't watched the show before, it is where we chit chat about photography and Boba Fett mugs. This is not an antique. This was my brother gave me this awesome mug for Christmas a couple of years ago. I think it was like a Rite Aid, 2012 goodie. I love it. It's huge, and I feel kind of like a nerd drinking out of it.
Yeah, but that thing is actually smaller than these old 1977 mugs. Of course, everything was probably just bigger back then, except for our homes, right? The cars were much bigger.
That's true. And big gulps. Big gulps are bigger now, aren't they?
Yeah, big gulp. Yeah, and Starbucks, well, I guess Starbucks did exist, but nobody knew about it in 1977.
Yeah. Anyway. All right. So the first part of this show is we spend a few moments kind of preaching to you about how awesome the Photo Enthusiast Network is, and just sharing with you tidbits of content. This is most of the folks in our chat right now are Photo Enthusiast Network members. You get access to the show. You get to submit images and hear our take on what we do to them in Lightroom, tips and tricks, as you will. And there's so much more. So we just want to share real quick content that went out. Every Tuesday, you get a new article. We call that the Tuesday Tip. And this week, yesterday, David set out a very simple tip. It's to take some time and to look at all of the content we have online. I do love this. Every week I talk about this. I love the kind of diversity of the tips. The best way I think to describe it is a photography book that comes out with a new chapter every week. Then these articles and these tips that just has great information for you. But if you've invested in the photography network and the photo enthusiast network, you need to take the time to review it and read it. And you're going to find that investing in yourself is really going to be helpful in the long term. So that's a great little tip. Just send out. And you also get a new video each week. The video this week was a window light tutorial. Very simple, very quick. This is part of David's new, and this is impressive. For those of you who know David McKay, longtime professional photographer, he likes to talk. He likes to talk in his videos. He likes to talk in person. He's a good guy, but brevity. Yeah, that's right. We've all roomed with him once or twice. Brevity is not quite his style, but he's working on it. And we are working on a series of short and sweet, quick tips for you in video format. We recognize it. You're busy. You got a lot going on. Maybe you don't want to sit down for a 15, 20-minute video, but a couple of minutes, literally 2 or 3 minutes, that gives you some tips and tricks on light or window light and how to set up for that really easily. I think those are pretty nice.
Yeah, I think it's a great resource for sure. I'm mostly impressed though with the fact that David's getting videos in 2 to 3 minutes. I can't believe that. I thought he could have gone for 5. I've been like, dude, are you sure you can get a 5-minute video in? But he went for 2. And so I think we all got to give him some kudos for that. He and Allie right now are on their way to the Croatia Tour. I think they were in Spain earlier today. I'm not sure where they are right now, but I don't think they'll be joining us in the chat room today, so we can pick on them all we want. But they're getting ready for a really cool tour out there in Croatia. So
that's right. That's right. Was it 2 years ago now is when we did the Croatia Tour, just a little less than 2 years. We did it in May, and that was a fantastic, fantastic trip. You know, I'd love to talk about some upcoming trips that we have, but every single trip we've announced, including the Southwest one that got announced during the show last week or right around it, they're all sold out. Every single one.
Well, we also, as for those of you that don't know, this year we're always giving Photo Enthusiast Network members first right of refusal of a trip. So we advertise it to our pen members first. Sometimes David has done some minor discounts as a pen member. If you join for a year, you actually get a voucher that you can apply towards a trip, which gets you a discount. So that's going on. But also, if there is a trip that's sold out, just let David know. I just kind of say this mainly to the pen members. Let David know that, if there's a last minute cancellation or something like that, you'd be interested in the tour, because it seems like almost every single trip, something comes up with somebody and they can't make it for whatever reason. It opens a spot. And if you're somebody that's able to just kind of pick up and go last minute and it's a place you'd really like to see, just let David know about it. Otherwise, we have no idea.
That's a great point. That's a great point. And if you're watching this show, you're not part of this network, you're not part of kind of the mailing list to get on these tours, you should go to McKay Live, McKayLive.com. No, McKay, I don't even know that URL.
McKayLive.com.
I was right. Okay. Second guessing myself. McKayLive.com. Sign up for the newsletter. I mean, you're just going to get lists about upcoming trips, and there's, really no reason not to. That Southwest one that we just finished up was fantastic. I can't wait to go back. I really, truly love it. It's become one of my favorite tours, even doing it again and again and again now because it's been so popular. I am very excited to go back again. So sign up for that. And also, Steve, real quick, we did the image review, you and I, because of Dave and Allie's travel schedule. You and I sat down this weekend and reviewed images. This is also a benefit to the Photo Enthusiast Network members. You get to submit images. Well, what Steve and I do during this show, we really want to focus on just kind of giving you some quick Lightroom tips and tricks with your images. But the image review is a much higher level, kind of PPA inspired. That's the Professional Photographers of America inspired rubric to grade your images and give you feedback. And each week we pick our 5 favorites out of the group submitted. We had a really strong showing this past month. Sorry, I said week, month. It's a monthly contest. And the winner gets a fantastic prize from Bay Photo each month. The winner this past month, John, is going to get a 16 by 24 canvas wrap valued at up to $124. That's fantastic. And of course, they could put that towards any image they want. It doesn't necessarily have to be the one they submitted. So I had a lot of fun doing that with you, Steve. Thanks for taking some time to sit down with me.
Yeah, I was curious to get your thoughts on it, because the only other image review, as far as that one goes, that you've been part of was the annual review where we did 2018. And we felt it was really important to get all of the founders of Penn, Toby, David, Ali, and myself online to do that. And that was a lot of fun. And it just, David and Ali have been going 150 miles an hour with both some family issues going on and traveling out to Oklahoma, and then the tours and everything else. So I thought it was really fun to get to do that with you, Toby, and hopefully you'll get a chance to, find time in your schedule. I know you've always got a gazillion things happening, but it was a lot of fun to do that together. And your intro was so professional.
I'll let you know. I wrote it down. I tried to do it just kind of off the cuff 2 times, and then I basically just slapped myself in the face and was like, just write it down to read it.
I'm like, dang, we took this image review to a whole new level now.
So, well, I really wanted to thank Bay Photo. So if you haven't watched it, I just put in a little blurb of what the winner and thank Bay Photo. I mean, it's really nice of them to do that. We're not giving them any money. They are somebody that we all chose to work with anyway. I've got a couple other sponsorships coming up, not during this show. Well, Squarespace is one of them, but that I just really feel lucky that they want to pay me to talk about their product, because I would do it anyway.
Yeah, Bay has been so generous. We kind of sought them out. We've been recommending them to our members for so long. I've personally used them since my high school days. And the fact that they didn't have to do this. I mean, just for us to be able to use their name and their logo and stuff like that would have been awesome. But they took it upon themselves to say, like, hey, yeah, we like what you're doing with these image reviews. We'll donate a gift every month. And they've just been tremendous to work with. And we get copied in on a lot of the emails that go back and forth between our marketing contact, Mallory, and ordering the prints for the winners and stuff. And everybody gets their stuff right away. They're always extremely happy with it. They'll ship internationally. They're just a great organization. So we feel very fortunate to be able to partner with them. And they do incredible work, which, that's what got things started. If they didn't do work that we wouldn't use ourselves, we just wouldn't talk about it.
That's right. Yep. And I mentioned Squarespace. Squarespace is nice enough to sponsor this show and my channel, some videos. So you can find out more about Squarespace at squarespace.com/PhotoRecTV. But I do think it's one of the best places to build a gorgeous website in 2019. Easy drag and drop interface. Drop your pictures on there. I'd say this in a very recent, the $500 video, was a longer ad for Squarespace. And what I really like about it is it gives you an easy place to build up a portfolio of your work. Don't rely on something like Instagram or Facebook, where you have no control over what's going on around your images. And in fact, you are even constrained by, their arbitrary aspect ratios, especially in the case of Instagram. You can't put up a tall portrait or a vertical image. Instagram's like, no, unless you want to do white boxes, and then it's smaller and then it looks weird in your feed. So really, even if you don't use Squarespace, do make a space for you, somebody that's your own, and you control how your images look. But I do like Squarespace, and you can save 10% off your first purchase of your gallery, website, domain name, whatever you want to do. That's all wrapped up into one if you want at squarespace.com/PhotoRecTV. We thank them so much for their support.
You bet.
Let's dive into one of our favorite parts of the show, which if you haven't watched in a while, we've moved towards the beginning. I know Steve and I, we chit chat a little bit, but I have to say we're only 15 minutes in and we're wrapping up the chit chat. That's good.
That's a new record, man.
It might be. And we're going to talk a little bit about the gear on the table, including one of the smallest, most impressive cameras I've ever seen. And of course, all that stuff I teased at the beginning. But what we want to do right now is take some time. Photo Enthusiast Network members have submitted to us a few images that we want to kind of give them some tips and tricks about. So I'm going to share my screen entire screen. And I'm also going to click here and then here. All right, so we've had a couple of submissions this week. We've got a couple from new member, Sue. Thank you for taking the time to submit. And again, if you want to see your images here, if you want to hear us give feedback on them and show some Lightroom tips and tricks, just become a Photo Enthusiast Network member. There's a free 10-day trial. All right. So first up, Sue submitted to us this Venice shot. And I think we're going to have time to do both of these images here, Sue. And you're looking at this right now, Stephen. Sue, you have sent a JPEG, which is fine, but just know that we can't work on it quite as much as if it had been a raw image. Now, Sue, I know you were looking for some advice in how to remove stuff. I don't see anything that jumps out at me in this shot of removing. I certainly wouldn't remove the gondola. That's part of the story. How about you, Steve?
She wanted to know if there's anything that should be removed.
Yes, I think. Let's look at our other picture. Oh, that's Chris's. Here's another one. Oh, that's. Oh, yeah. Okay.
Well, yeah, this photo for sure. I can
yes.
talk about things to remove. The previous photo. I mean, we say this a lot on this show, and when you're getting to the point where you've got the photo edited and you've kind of done what you want to do in Lightroom, and you want to take it to that next level of, okay, now I need to go into Photoshop and try and figure out if there's little things that need to be removed or added in or whatever. Think of it as a painting and ask yourself, if I was painting this scene, would I put that in there? And if the answer is yes, then leave it. And if the answer is no, then maybe consider taking that out. So when I look at a scene like this, there's nothing glaring at me that should be removed. I would probably do a little bit of work with some of the hot spots and highlights that are down in the bottom of the photograph, because those tend to kind of stop your eye from moving up the picture. Or they bring your eye out of what's going on with the depth of the photo and the action and the subject of the photo, and it's just a distraction. And maybe consider the clotheslines and stuff like that, but that's all kind of part of the scene. So that just becomes a little subjective. If you were painting that, would you put those in there? Mm-hmm. I think it's a cool shot. The thing that worries me about this shot is the whites look really bright. Mm-hmm. And I'm losing any kind of possible texture on the buildings in the white. Now, it might be smooth, but just be really careful of that. Toby, I don't know, hit the J key and see if any of that's blown out. It looks good in the histogram, so you might be absolutely fine.
Yep. Yeah, I definitely think you're fine in the raw. Since you've given us a JPEG, it's thrown out a lot of data that we can work with. And as we start to bring overall exposure down, you can see that it just kind of gets a little bit more gray. It's not going to do that in the raw, Sue. So certainly, I agree with Steve. Bring that down so we can see a little bit more. It's just brighter areas of the image just keep drawing the eye back. And so we kind of.
Well, if you notice, Toby, you brought that exposure down. Now look at the walls on the right side. You can see a difference in white between the building, the side of the building, and the framing around the windows. It's very white around the windows, and now the building itself is a little bit more subdued, and you can see that contrast there. Before, it just, I kind of missed the framing around the windows because everything was brightened up so much. So there's architectural elements that you miss if you make it a little too hot.
Yep. And then, I've just made some basic edits. These are edits that I make to almost every picture. Highlights down, shadows up. Whites depends, in this case, because of these brighter areas, I brought them down a little bit. Blacks almost always come down. And clarity back up just a little bit. This is one of those scenes, though, that I think would benefit from another picture once the gondola has moved forward just a little bit more. See how his pole paddle, I'm sure that has a fancy Italian name, but how it's just intersecting with this kind of corner of the building. I'd love to see it coming forward a little bit more so that intersection was lost. But otherwise, I think this is a good, fun, colorful scene that says Venice very nicely.
Yeah, Toby, hit the J key one more time. There's one thing I want to. Okay, that awning in the very back. I didn't know if that was being blued out because the was lost in black, or if that was the blue of the awning. So I would isolate blue. I would hit the color panel, and I would go down to blue, and I would probably take the saturation down just a bit, that's also really going to kind of help it in the water right at the bottom of the photograph, because it just looked a little too saturated, too almost fake. And then you can always do a graduated filter at the bottom and really reduce the blue a little bit there. And I would even crop it up from the bottom just a bit. Start with
I was going to ask you about that. It feels very tall, and it doesn't feel like that extra part of the water is a compelling part of the story. Kind of come up to maybe the corner of that building on the left.
Yep.
Nice. All right. Nice shot, Stu, and I hope we gave you some things to think about. We're going to move on. Chris Bartell has a picture of these orchids, and has even done a virtual mat, one of our very most popular tutorials on the Photo Enthusiast Network, how to get this to stand out a little bit more. And I have to say, this is quite a lovely picture.
Yeah, this is beautiful. It's whenever I see these shots now, I think Lori Myers is in the chat room with us today. She's got a beautiful photograph. It made it into our annual review. I can't remember if she won the month it was submitted, but it's called Bleeding Heart, and it's of this flower, and it's really dark in the background. And she just did a wonderful job of completely almost blacking out anything that was behind the flower, and that's all you see. I'd like to see a little bit of that here. You know, you may have to paint it in because you have to paint around the flowers and stuff, but to really just darken it so that you're unapologetic of what you want the viewer to see.
Yep, I agree. Real quick, just to kind of show you what Steve's doing, we're not going to pop over to Photoshop for this one, but just bringing shadows down, because that is all kind of a darker area. That's what I love about these sliders in Lightroom. Without masking, it's really kind of controlling that area and really darkening it, which looks pretty good. You could even, if you were, well, let's get the brush. Let's do it right. A little bit more right. Let's take shadows down a little bit more. I'm going to use the bracket keys to make the brush nice and big. And you know what? I'm going to take exposure down as well and just kind of start to paint in here. And watch how slow Lightroom really is. It is painting. Okay. Is my flow? Oh.
Yes. And I always tell people, like, you know, they say it takes so long and stuff. Well, yeah, it does. But, you know, that's, you're making art. And this is what we have. This is actually, it's good to spend some time really working on this stuff, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. So that was with auto mask turned on. I might, let's turn it off and just get a little bit more on those lattice work, because it missed that. It thought it needed to include that. And that could help. But we have a couple of great tutorials in Photoshop that would allow you to really select the edges of, it's holding down the Alt key to get to minus. They'll allow you to select the edges of this flower and then really manipulate the background. Away from it. Let's see. There we go. I'm just trying to erase off some of my sloppy brush editing off the flower petals themselves. There we go. And again, that's with, auto mask is turned on when I hold the Alt key down and I'm in erase mode. Alt key, I love it. If you're brushing and working in Lightroom and you want to do a quick erase of something you've brushed, the Alt key immediately switches you over. And just a couple of those keyboard shortcuts really will make your kind of your editing efficiency go up a lot more. As Steve was just saying, we do hear that, you know, you all say it takes so long to edit, but you start to learn some of these little tips and tricks and it really makes it much faster. Yep. Still there, Steve? Okay.
Yeah. Sorry.
Sorry.
I'm sitting here, I'm looking at the virtual mat now, and some of the painting went over some of the lines and it looks kind of cool.
Oh, yeah.
Faded in and out look now. But Chris, I will say, if you're watching this or you watch it later, I would like to see a virtual mat maybe a little bit thicker than this. I like the purple that was selected, but I probably would have taken opacity down just a bit so it's not competing with the flowers quite so much. And that's kind of why I like what's happened here with the fading in and out. But if you want that consistent purple around it, you know, just a little slightly lighter colored purple. I do like to pull from a color that is within the photo, but then I take the opacity down, or I take the tone of that down so that it doesn't compete completely out on the edges and draw your viewer outside of the photograph too much.
Yep. Yep. Nicely said. Okay, we're going to move on. And Chris, as a Photo Enthusiast Network member, remember, if you want a little bit more feedback on that image, if you're thinking about submitting it to the monthly image review, certainly reach out and we can help you with that. Sue, I remember actually I've worked on this image already. You posted it in our forum. So we've got a Facebook community page. We also have a forum if you're not a Facebook user, or if you would just like another avenue of kind of receiving feedback on your images. And you had asked about this image, and I gave you some I actually edited it up and then posted my response. So let me just show you briefly how I would remove, I'd clean up these little sticks here and stuff. Steve, do you agree with that?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I would, so you've got the initial foreground there that is one extra layer. And if you want to keep that in there, that's fine, but it just, you have a lot more cleanup to do. I would take all that debris out of there. Otherwise, you could do what you're doing here and just go to more of like a 16:9 sort of ratio crop that's just wide and horizontal. You do cut out that extra layer of foreground, but that, for this scene, that's okay. I would actually crop it in from the left side probably a bit too, to get rid of that other dune that's starting, but it ends abruptly. Again, that's just, you know, something that is, your mind wants to see where that's going, and then it just stops before you're able to, your mind's eye is able to imagine what the next dune looks like. So just clip it out of there like you did. And then I'd probably take those little trees off in the background out. Just keep it very kind of monotone. And this could actually look incredible as a black and white image too.
Yeah, let's try that in a second. I didn't do that with that. I really think, you know, it sounds kind of hokey. I hear you say this from time to time, Steve, but it really has stuck with me, even though it sounds a little hokey. And that is like, what is the story of the image? And to me, that foreground didn't add any to the story. The story here is this awesome texture to this dune that's kind of out here in the middle of whatever this is. I think, Sue, you recently went on some amazing trip. I remember seeing some of your pictures. I think this might be in Namibia. So focusing in on that, getting tighter, as we just did with our crop, is I think makes for a stronger composition. Let me show real quick, because I know Sue wanted this specifically removing stuff. Lightroom can do it. Let's see how it does, and let's show you some tips and tricks for that. So what Lightroom does when you use the little Q tool, the spot removal, is it just samples from someplace else. And it really, even when you have heal, it doesn't make any new pixels. It just takes pixels from someplace else and layers them over top. And if I mouse over, you kind of lose where that is, but you can see that they don't line up quite as nicely anymore. And if you were going to actually print this at a nice size, that wouldn't be good. So you got a couple of options. One, you can kind of come in here and try to line them up yourself. Maybe you can find exactly where they line up a little bit more if you do something like that. A little bit harder to see. Or you could go as small as possible. So I'm going to zoom in, way in, 2:1. And I'm going to go to a little teeny brush, just big enough. And maybe do just part of it at a time. So then it's going to line up in a much better way.
Yeah, and what Toby's saying, I use in Photoshop as well, is anytime you're doing removal and this type of work, you work very, very tight. So zoom in. I mean, even if you zoom all the way into the pixel level, yeah, it doesn't look great as you're working on it, but that gets you the best result. And then when you back out, it looks very clean.
Yeah, I'm laughing here because I think I just made it worse.
Yeah, Lightroom. So just so you guys know my workflow, I never do any of this stuff in Lightroom. I just think it's horrible. Toby's got a lot more patience with Lightroom than I do. I take this all into Photoshop because it just.
Let's do an easy one. That one was easy. This, of course, is easy here. Let's go to Photoshop real quick. Again, there's a ton of these tutorials Photo Enthusiast Network. So I just right-clicked, said Edit in Photoshop. If you're working with a Creative Cloud, you have both of these programs available to you. It's popping over here to Photoshop eventually. Eventually, there we go. And what tool would you use for this, Steve?
Well, you can either use the lasso tool or the, I mean, since you're in tight, I'd probably just use the spot healer, the Band-Aid. Either one of those. Spot healing brush tool. There you go.
Yeah, thank you. All right. And this tool requires no sampling. You just paint over it, and it thinks about where it should match up, and it does it. And then sometimes maybe it'll take a couple tries, but let's zoom back out.
Yeah, I mean, that's just, and the reason for that, folks, I know I've talked about this before, but if you haven't heard me say it, is Photoshop is literally altering the pixels of the image. That's why you can't work on raw files in Photoshop. They have to be converted to something, and then it alters the pixels of that photo. Lightroom is considered non-destructive, so it's just giving you a set of directions on how it's going to show you the photograph. So that's why Photoshop is so much more powerful with types of edits, because it's literally changing the pixels of the image. And so anyway, that's why I always do this kind of work in Photoshop. It's just much more efficient once you get the hang of it. And yeah, and then I'd probably pop those trees out back there, just because you know, they're different than the rest of the scene. And then I was kind of thinking about this image, Sue. So you have the ribs in the sand at the bottom left, and then there's this smooth area, and then you've got the detail that appears really nice and crisp as you travel up the frame. So I would even consider maybe even more cropping out more of the bottom of this, and just kind of starting things off with that texture down there. And then I'd go a little crazy with my edits. I'd put in a lot of contrast and just really accentuate the detail that's in the foreground of this picture. And that's why I think a black and white could look really cool. It's a beautiful shade of kind of this brown color, but if you do this and then really just kind of make it extreme, you can see where the shadow fall off is, and just the details and the lines and stuff like that, and you get those little sticks and stuff out of there. I think it would look really cool.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's always nice to kind of check in at the little navigator window too, to give a sense of it here. But yeah, I think that looks nice. All right, so reach out if you've got more questions about that. But we're going to move on to keep this show on a schedule. Adam sent in this shot of a cougar, mountain lion. And it's actually shot at a zoo through glass, so you don't have to worry about Adam's safety. He returned home with all of his digits. Beautiful cat, really, really nice.
Toby, flip this around real quick. I want to see what it looks like.
So I'm going to right click and no, what am I going to do? I'm going to go to transform, flip horizontal. What do you think?
So I'll tell you what my concern, you can kind of see that it was shot through glass down. You see that line that goes from the bottom left across the cat?
Yeah.
It's probably some glare right there.
Yeah.
And that line was just kind of bugging me because it was backwards. And then the thing with the cat is it's looking right at the edge of the frame. There's not any space left in the direction that the cat is looking. So no matter which way it's presented, if he's looking off to the right, or now we flipped it and he's looking to the left, because there isn't space, that's why I wanted to see it flipped, because visually you're going to travel left to right and you're going to land on where the cat is and then where it's looking, and that keeps you in the frame by almost this ping pong, right? You're going left to right and then you see the cat's looking back, so it kind of keeps you in the picture. Before, I kind of felt like you saw where the cat was, and then you immediately just tried to look off frame, and it cut off so quickly. So I don't know if whose picture is this?
This is Adam Beck's.
Adam, I don't know if you have room, if this has been cropped, but if you have room in the direction that the cat is looking, it's always good to, and this was the other thing I was going to ask you to do, is to go into Photoshop and we can just create some space, because there's not a lot of texture and stuff there.
Yeah, it created some whiskers, and you can see it gets a little funny, but I got some ideas for that in a minute, and a little funny down there as well. But let's let it just fill in. We're just using, for those who are only half paying attention, chat room, talking about the weather and things like that. I just using content aware fill. I just made the canvas a little bit bigger and then asked Photoshop. We call this Lightroom tips and tricks, but really we kind of bounce back and forth because Photoshop is an integral part of the process. And we've just kind of bounced in here and just given ourselves just a little bit more room in front of the kitty cat.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then you can use those other tricks. Like, so, it's content aware fill, despite Adobe's claims of being amazing, is just kind of amazing. I mean, it's not foolproof. And so we can kind of mess that up a little bit. Same thing with Sue's. You really want to watch out for any kind of repetition or something that doesn't look so quite right. And now I'm just using, whoops.
Is this the clone stamper?
Yep, just using the clone stamper to just kind of get rid of that weird line right up to the leg, a little bit of purple there. And then maybe even on the leg itself, we can kind of get rid of some of that. It's a little tricky, but you just kind of match up lines and nobody knows if that continued further down there or not.
One of the things I want to bring to your attention when Toby zooms back out is that the cat's face is now in the center of the photograph, but it almost looks like it's over on the upper right third, which is a very powerful place for your subject to be. Only because, we've created some extra space over on that left-hand side now. And visually, again, you're traveling left to right, and now you're kind of focused more on that upper right section of the photograph. You can flip it back around the way it was and see how that plays out. But the edits that Toby's doing here, regardless of the direction that you show the image, definitely help the image to become a bit stronger.
Yep. Yeah. One thing that I just did that I think is really powerful, if you were like me for years, Photoshop was just kind of a daunting, scary thing. The idea of selecting subjects and masking and all of that just seemed overwhelming. And now you've got select subject, and gosh, man, it does such a good job so often. And I just asked to select the subject. Photoshop decided based on what's in focus, what is kind of similar color. Look at it. It really did a good job, missing a little bit there. And of course, very tricky, the whiskers. But what we could do is just what I want to do now is I'm just holding down the shift key, got the lasso tool. Let's just get a little bit of these whiskers real quick. And then if we wanted to hold down the Alt key to kind of minus in here, that part. And then we inverse this and filter, blur. We could do, let's do Gaussian blur for simplicity's sake, but we can just kind of further blur the background. Now you can see we got to be really careful. You're going to have to work on the whiskers on your own, but you can kind of, you just make out a fence back there. And a little bit more blur, I think, makes the cat stand out. Don't overdo it in the foreground. There's more work that needs to be done there. But for the background, I think that works just fine. Actually, what I would use is the field blur, which kind of mimics out of focus that you get from lenses. It's under the blur gallery, field blur. Yeah. And then Steve, so let's just say we're done with this extra that we've made. We want to go back to Lightroom. We just close and save. And back in Lightroom, we get a second version of it now, and we can flip this one back around as Steve suggested. Transform, flip horizontal. Yeah.
I still, personally, I like the flipped version just because, I like that tension of being kind of caught in this visual ping pong match of staying in the picture. But it looks better with some breathing room, as we like to call it, in the direction that the cat is looking. So either way you show it, I think that strengthened the image slightly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then chat room, you're asking about lightening the cat a little bit. Yeah, I might lighten him just a little bit, stand out from the background. Not much though. His exposure is pretty nice. I might try to brighten those eyes a little bit, and I would use that iris enhance brush to do that. It's mostly made for people, but it'll work on animals as well. Just to give them a little bit more pop. And then if you really wanted to, and this is the kind of level that we're working when we want to submit images to PPA, or really just when you want to finish a good image that you're proud of, take the time to brighten the catch lights, maybe even a little bit more to make those stand out as well.
Yeah, and somebody asked about Pali. I don't know if I apologize if I'm not saying the name right. What about some teeth whitening? And yeah, I mean, you could throw a little bit of that on there. You got to be careful, though. You still want it to look natural. I see that a lot of times, especially with people. They get in there and use that teeth whitening brush, and it just goes a little extreme. So I do it slightly. Still want it to look natural.
Yep. Yep. Adam, we're going to come back to your sunset picture. You told me that was okay. We'll come back to that next week. Let's move on to Christina's kind of coastline picture.
Oh, this is cool. This is a kind of a reverse C curve, a natural reverse C curve, and I think you guys can all see that. It could be an S curve, but we're not exactly sure what happens on the other side of that land there.
That's right. Would you flip this, Steve?
No, I wouldn't. I mean, you can try it. We can look at it flip, but I think it's going to look really backwards. Oh, that actually looks kind of cool. It looks better than I thought, but I still like the original better.
I do too.
Because you got the shoreline that's starting in the lower left, and then visually you're kind of going out, and then your eye comes back, and then your eye goes back out to that next layer that's all the way in the background. And then as your eye also moves from the bottom to the top of the photograph, you've got this, rigid, contrasty land, and then these clouds, which kind of brings me to some of the edits that I would do. It's looking, on my screen at least, very blotchy up in the sky.
I'm getting that too, and I'm not sure why. This is a D&G out of the Fuji X-T3, and it's ISO 160. I don't know where that's coming from, but what would you do to fix it, Steve?
Well, I would probably mask off the sky with like a graduated filter, and then I would smooth that out. I'd probably reduce the blues maybe a little bit. I would create the sky. You still want the drama, which you can have in there, but you want it to be softer so that the contrast of the rigid land, it just, for me, it always looks better that way.
Actually, so I realized that Christina had done that. That was a graduated filter across the sky. And I think it was mostly coming from the dehaze. That's where most of that blotchiness seems to be coming from. And we backed that off a little bit.
Well, what happens if you take her graduated filter from the sky off and just go with no filter up in the sky at all?
And which ones? Okay, she's got two in the sky. Let's take both off for a minute. There are some edits already here, as folks can see. Christina sent in a D&G, which shows edits, which I really like to see how you all edit them, and then we just can delete it because that's what we just did. So that's what it looks like without any graduated filters in the sky. Steve, what do you think?
And how about, she did a custom white balance, but if you take that profile and go to landscape and then see maybe what auto white balance would look like, it looks a little too blue, and you can really see it in the rock out there. It's got it had a blue tint to it. I like it just a bit warmer.
So here's Adobe Landscape and then auto.
Okay. Yeah, I could see why she did the graduated filter in the sky, get a little bit more detail out there. I'm still seeing like some violet or purple sort of blotchiness.
I am too. I'm not quite sure why. I'm a little stumped by that.
Yeah.
Yeah, everything else looks good. But yeah, I like
her in the crop and everything. She totally nailed it.
Yeah. I like, see, it goes away. Let's see. So I've just thrown on, it just brightened it a little bit, but we don't want to actually do that, really. Come back down. Okay. That's weird. And then did you actually like going a little bit? I know we've talked about this fairly often on the show, decreasing the clarity on the clouds.
I usually do. Yeah, I usually do. It's think of a long exposure. If you use like an ND filter or something and you did a 1 minute exposure here or something, the clouds would just be softened a little bit. There's room for dramatic clouds. I think that's totally cool looking. But when you've got a rocky kind of rigid scene that we have here, I personally like a contrast of clouds that are just softer and very different than the land.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, I like that. And now I'm going to grab a new filter and drag up from the bottom. Just want a little bit more life in the landscape, a little bit brighter. Some of these rocks here that have no detail because they're black, they just kind of stand out. So I am just going to raise the shadows a bit. Ooh, just a bit. And this is where maybe you want to just kind of paint it on those rocks instead, because you don't want the landscape to look too unrealistic. But having this nice bright light here feels like it's filling in nicely here. And then we've got the kind of the rolling hills. And what happens if we go a little bit left on the green and a little bit right on the temp? I should say left on the tint. So we go green and a little warmer. What do you think?
I don't know if we have time, but you've got a really cool trick on creating those God rays from the sky, which you could almost do with this photograph, because you can clearly see where the bright part of the sky is shining on the bright part of the land with the bright green.
Yeah. Yeah. That would just be a graduated filter, and then you can make it kind of skinny and just kind of bring it down. So it literally, and you can duplicate these. And you want to keep this pretty subtle. You don't want to overdo it, but then you could actually feel like you're making some distinction here. Again, it shows up very nicely in the navigator, I think, and feel like you're really starting to see these. Let's just overdo it for a second so you can really feel like, because they were there, you're just helping them come out. Yeah. Yeah. That's a beautiful shot, Christine, and I think a little bit of editing helps, in that little bit of unclarity on the sky really helps there as well. Nice. All right, we're going to wrap up that part of the show because we've talked way too long on it. And back to us. Thank you, everybody who submitted those images. If you would like to submit images to see us edit in the future, consider joining the Photo Enthusiast Network. Let's talk about news, Steve. Is there any news?
All right.
Is that what we're talking about first? Gear news. Any gear news that has jumped out at you?
Well, first thing this morning, I woke up and I had an email that said the Canon SL3 has just been announced. So I read the specs on that. I thought that was that totally caught me by surprise. But I will admit I haven't been keeping a close eye on Canon rumors over the last few weeks. But the first thing I thought about when I saw that news story is, man, I wish that camera was out when Toby did his $500 camera review with all those different models, because was it the SL1 that you had in there?
No, I had the T6. The
T6. That's right. Yeah. If you could not have had the T6 in there and had this SL3, I mean, I don't know that Canon would have fared a lot better than how it did in the lineup, but this is an impressive camera for $549 for somebody that wants to take it, get out of the cell phone pictures and start learning photography.
I will agree with that. And it's a little bit of a stretch because I did want all of those $500 cameras to have lenses, and you get the $650 when you throw the lens on. But really, the SL2, honestly, if we're really critiquing that video of mine, the SL2 should have been in there instead of the T6i, I think. But so we've got the SL3, and I teased this in the opening. I didn't think they were going to make an SL2. I thought they were going to continue to shrink down their kind of T7 line. Which they did. When they went from the T6 to the T7, they shrunk it. And I thought, well, they're just going to squeeze the SL2 out. Nope. A couple months later, after I said, I don't think they'll make an SL2, they came out with the SL2. And now we even have an SL3, which here's the biggest shocker about this, I think. Their smallest little rebel out of the whole entire line, all the way up through the 80Ds and stuff. This is the first to get 4K. It's got 4K.
Yeah.
a Canon DSLR with 4K for just $650. Now, there's some caveats. First, what Canon does really well is their dual pixel autofocus, very smooth and cinematic autofocus during video. That is not available to you during 4K. So you won't want to be autofocusing during 4K. Still, it's usable. And two, it has a significant crop. So this is already a crop sensor camera, 1.6 times. When you're shooting 4K, it crops in even more. It's actually 2.64 crop. And that, I don't have one on the table, actually within reach, but I've got the screenshot up right now so you can't see me anyway. That is more than a micro four thirds crop. So, you know, that's a little disappointing. They've also done the weird thing. There's no 1080, 24 frames per second. But this is a very small, lightweight DSLR that in some ways kind of gives you the best of both worlds, small, lightweight, mirrorless style, and still you've got a traditional DSLR, access to all of those Canon lenses. And as you pointed out in the opening, $650. Or if you've already got some Canon lenses, $549. That's pretty significant.
Yeah, and I think when you think about who the target customer is for this camera, I think this is an incredible value. If you want to get into that DSLR or mirrorless realm, and you want to learn photography, let's say you want to come out on one of our tours. Yosemite is like a great starter tour. It's domestic. A lot of people from the West can drive there, and you don't have more of a professional camera or an all manual camera. $550, $650 with a lens, and that lens has a great range. You got a great camera, and it's an EF mount, so you're getting started in the Canon world. You're getting started with their menu system and the way the camera operates and stuff. Because if you look at some of the operation of that camera, it's very similar to what I've got with my 5D Mark IV. So you could kind of work your way up through the line, and I happen to like that. I don't like learning new menus and new buttons and what does what. So I think if you want to get started with Canon, it's a great way to go. I recently bought my stepson for Christmas an M50. I think M50. And it's great because he can use an adapter and use some EF lenses and stuff like that. But I was a little leery of that whole M mount system. This being an EF mount system, I kind of wish that this camera would have come out before Christmas time. I probably would have gone down this route for him instead.
Yeah, definitely. It gives you huge versatility. You got tons of Canon lenses. I know, Steve, I think a lot of people, actually, I don't know if people think that Steve and I are very similar. We're two dudes. We love photography. We love photography education, but we are quite different in a lot of ways as well. I mean, look at Steve's bedroom. Look at my desk. I mean, super clean. In a lot of ways, I feel like we're yin and yang. And I'm so close to disagreeing with you here, Steve. I'm getting close to the point where I'm hesitating to recommend people buy traditional DSLRs. I think we are so close to just starting to see that all really go away. But then the realist in me says these Canon EF lenses are going to be around forever. A good Canon lens today is still going to be a good Canon lens in 5 years, 8 years. I mean, that's a long time. So, but I'm getting close.
Yeah, no, your point is so well taken, and you adopted the mirrorless shooting years ago. I mean, and I've recently come around. I've got a mirrorless camera, and I love using that camera. And actually, that is one of the main reasons I ended up going with the M50 for Bobby, is because it is mirrorless and it is the Canon world. So I knew as he was learning, I could really help him with that. He lives out in California. I'm in East Tennessee, so being able to talk through text and phone and stuff, it's something that I was pretty familiar with was going to be the way to go. And I did decide on going mirrorless for him. So I totally hear what you're saying. And that point, really, we are at a point now where you can't overlook that. You do have to take into consideration, do you want to go mirrorless or DSLR? And it's, it'll take you 10 minutes to read and kind of learn what the differences are. But the future is mirrorless. I will certainly say that.
Yeah, and I don't want to scare anybody away. And we've got Joffins just says they just got their T7i last week. RIP RIP. You know, the thing is to keep in mind, just because a new camera comes out does not in any way diminish what you have and what you can go out and make pictures with. And by buying it just last week, you saved a ton of money. You know, it's definitely come down in price from when it was first announced. So that's always good there.
Well, and I said this last show, I started my professional photography business with a Rebel T3i. From there, I went to the 60D and then eventually got into full frame.
Yeah.
So, the T7i is an awesome camera. I love that camera.
Yeah.
You know, you pay a bit more than the SL3, I believe, unless
a little bit more,
unless you find some sales and stuff like that. But
yeah.
I think it's a great camera. So.
Yeah. But let's, you know, we started to go down this road. So let's bring up this other point that I teased at the beginning, and that is the CIPA numbers for February are out. CIPA is the Camera and Imaging Products Association in Japan. They published their February report, and it's not good. It's not good. And I think it's especially not good when you think about what has been announced recently. So here we are. We've got this is really small, isn't it? Can I make that? Yeah. So the purple or the bluish is 2017 numbers, total shipment of built-in lens cameras. The black is 2018, and the orange is where we are so far. So you can see a pretty significant drop from 2017 to 2018, and that drop is continuing in 2019. That's point and shoots, though. I would expect that. Everybody is ditching their point and shoots for their phones these days. So what about more serious, though? Interchangeable lens cameras. We can see that 2017 to 2018 were actually quite close, with a pretty significant drop off in the last couple of months. And it does look like that drop off is continuing. Now, why I say this is, I think, particularly worrying is because we now have a brand new mirrorless cameras in the kind of the last half of last year, or even like let's see, the Canon EOS R was announced in September and started shipping in October-ish, I think. The Nikon Z series was roughly about the same time frame. So we have all of these new cameras on the market that should be selling fairly well, should, I think, see a bump up, and we're not really seeing that.
That's interesting.
It is. The other thing I think is interesting is this black bump back here is without a doubt the Sony a7 III. When I look at my sales, my affiliate sales and through B&H of March and April last year, they're very, very good. A lot of people were buying the a7 III.
Yeah. So, is this kind of, you've got two bumps, right? Earlier in the year, springtime, and then in the fall. So that's when you start to see a lot of new introductions.
Yeah, and that's in 2018, this bump I believe was probably the EOS R and the Z series from Nikon. Could somebody in chat remind me exactly when that Z series started coming out? I can't remember. But you know, this fall off. Now, I mean, do we care as photographers? Does this you know impact our ability to go out and make photos?
No, it doesn't impact our ability to go out and make photos. The reason I care about it, though, is that if I'm going to spend my hard-earned cash on a piece of equipment that costs a lot of money, and I'd like to get some longevity out of that, is where is the smartest place to spend my money?
Yeah.
I don't know what the reason for that type of decline would be with an interchangeable lens camera, especially when you know that point and shoots are just kind of going away for the cell phones. So I get that. Is it that people, you know, have their interchangeable lens cameras, and to me, it feels like we're in such a phase of transitioning from the DSLR world to the mirrorless world that a lot of people are probably just tightening up their purse strings and saying, let me let some of this stuff just wash out for a little while before I spend my money. Canon was coming out with their mirrorless system. I guarantee you tons of people had money ready to burn on that system, and then it came out and they just put it right back in their wallets and said, nah, that wasn't quite as exciting as I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, I think that's a huge part of it, Steve. I think that's a really good point. Fabio also in chat made that kind of similar point with just 2 words saying market confusion. I
Yeah,
think
good.
people are trying to let things settle down, figure these things out. The other part of it, I think, is that in some ways it feels like our pace of progression with these cameras is very rapid. You know, for a while it's like Sony A7, A7 II, and wow, this one does this, it's so much better. But honestly, when you take a step back, the number of people that I talk to with A7 IIs that are like, should I upgrade to the A7 R2s? Should I upgrade to A7 R3s? You know, there isn't a huge compelling reason. And
Yeah.
in Fuji X-T2, should you upgrade to the X-T3? Sure, there are some benefits, but it's not huge. And
Yeah.
we often say, you know, your money should be better spent on lenses, or just kind of waiting a little bit to see as this shakes out. So I think those are 2 big key factors in this. And it doesn't make me overly concerned that next week we'll be out of business because there won't be any cameras to talk about.
That is very true. But I love that term, market confusion, that Fabio said. That's a great way to just kind of sum it all up. You know, I mean, you see it with the stock market, right? When there's confusion at all, the stock market does horrible. When there's some direction on which way we're going to go with companies and stuff like that, even if it's not the direction that you want them to go in, at least you know it's the unknown that keeps the money in the wallets. So yeah, I think market confusion is a good way to put it. If I had to just say what is the biggest contributing factor, I would think it's probably that, but I could be way off base. I don't follow this stuff nearly close enough.
Yeah. I should follow it more closely, but like I said, you know, it's interesting, but I also don't, you know, want to be overly tied into this. I really like spending my time going out and taking pictures and whatever gear you end up with outside, whether it's a T2i today, even still is a fine camera to go make some beautiful pictures with, or, you know, something newer, like what we got on the table.
Yeah.
Let's talk for just a moment. As I said, I'm working on a full video about tips for sharper images. It's probably my #1 question I get. Somebody writes and says, my pictures aren't sharp. And it's such a kind of bag of worms. Is that a saying? Bag of worms?
A bag of worms. I was going to laugh anyway at the way you were reacting to this. And then he said bag of worms. Who the heck says bag of worms?
It's a barrel of bad apples. Is that better?
Then again, man, I moved from California to the South, so I'm hearing stuff all the time that just cracks me up. I love it. Bag of worms. Well, I'm going to use that someday.
Okay. To bring it back in line, so I went to my son's science fair last week, and some of those science experiments were hilarious. The issue when you say to me, my pictures aren't sharp, is that there are so many variables. And that's what's the issue with so many of these science fair projects. It was like, you have so many variables. How do you know that the goat poop made that grass grow better than the chicken poop? You know, did you put them in this? Anyway, I'll go get it. I'll critique those science fair projects another day on another show. So I've been writing out some lists, and Steve and I, we want to talk about a couple of them right now. I'll go first and talk a little bit about shutter speed. And this is a personal story to me. Way back when I got my first DSLR, the Rebel XT, you know, I thought I really knew what I was doing at that point. I'd had the kind of the fancier, I think it was the G5 Canon point and shoot for a while. And I bought the Rebel XT with just the 50 prime because I was trying to be cheap and also, you know, kind of be cool and photographic. All I need is that. And I was getting all of these pictures that weren't sharp. And I'm looking and researching why am I getting, it was my shutter speed. I was not paying attention to my shutter speed. I wasn't taking into account my focal length and the crop factor to make sure my shutter speed was fast enough. That was it. That was the reason why. It had nothing to do with faulty equipment. And I feel like that so often is the subtext in this question. I'm not getting sharp pictures. I want to blame my equipment. And it's so rarely the equipment. I don't mean to be mean, but it's you all. It's me. You know, those are the reasons I don't get sharp pictures. So you got to take into account your focal length. And really, the safe rule of thumb is double your focal length, taking into account your crop factor. So if you got a full frame camera and you're shooting at 24 millimeters, your shutter speed should be at least 1/48th of a second to handhold. If you zoom the lens to 105, or let's say you zoom it to 50 for easy math, not that 105 is hard math, then your shutter speed should be at least 1/100th of a second, double that focal length. If you have to account for the crop factor, which for most of these crop sensor bodies, the Fuji X-T3 and the Sony, they're right about 1.5. So you have to do 1.5 times the focal length, then multiply that by 2 as well. You can cheat that rule if you got image stabilization, but anytime it's critical that you get a sharp shot, you should be following that rule. And I'll, yeah, that's all I'll say now, because we do want to keep this show to a reasonable length. Steve, you got some suggestions?
Well, I'll just talk very briefly, and I've talked about this before on Tuesday Tips and that kind of stuff, and I always talk about this with people early on in a tour, and that is how to hold your camera. And I like to have fun with this on a tour. We kind of talk to some people about if they have really bad habits on how they're holding their camera. And then towards the end of the tour, after we've been shooting for a few days, I like to just kind of slap people's arms around and say, get that elbow down. But what you really want to do, let me hang on a sec. I probably should have done this earlier.
I'm just glad you're wearing pants this time.
Yeah, I decided not to do this one in my underwear, so that was good, I guess. So what we see all the time is people hold their camera like this. They'll look through it and they'll have this elbow is out here, and they're using this to adjust the focal length or focus or whatever. And you're doing yourself a huge disservice by doing that. This hand is your stabilizing hand, and this is your control hand right over here. So basically just create a platform for your camera and put it on here. It doesn't matter how big your camera is, how small your camera is, just stabilize it here, and then take this arm, your elbow, and put this right into your gut down here. And this just holds it so much more stable than this. There's just no stability here whatsoever. So this little trick right here, if you're not doing this, will make your images much, much sharper, or at least give you the ability to shoot at a slower shutter speed, which kind of leads me to my second point, not just about how to hold your camera, but be humble. And I know we don't have this problem with anybody in our audience, and certainly not among our lovely pen members, but I've been on tours before where people swear that they will have no problem hand holding a picture at 1/10 of a second. And you swear up and down all day long, nope, I've taken plenty of them. My camera's got in-body stabilization. I can hold it for 1/10 of a second. And then we show the image on a giant screen, and I zoom in 2 times or 4 times, and it's just blurred. So don't think you're better than you are. We tell people like 60th of a second with a wider angle lens or faster. Quite honestly, I need it more around 80th or 100th of a second. I thought for a long time, hey, I'm stable. I know how to hold my camera. I can do this at a 40th or a 20th of a second. And I look at those shots, and they're just not quite clear enough. So just be humble. Just don't think you're better than you are. It's not worth it if you're going to get a blurry shot. Trust me, especially if you're shooting raw and you're going to go back and edit those pictures 5 years from now when you're a much better photographer. Those little changes that you make right now, you'll be able to hold on to those pictures, and they'll be an asset that you can use down the road. I have so many pictures from my time in Chicago when I was getting started as a professional, and it just drives me nuts because I zoom in tight and there's just some blur, or the composition wasn't quite right. I wish so much that I could just go back to that time and change the way I held my camera or some of the things that I looked at. So, just be willing to learn, be humble, and know how to hold your camera.
Yeah, good points. And oh shoot, I was thinking of something while you were talking, but I was distracted by just how snappy and clean you look today. And then of course that bedroom behind you, it's just so clean. I just can't get over it.
We got warm weather in the South now. It's time to break out the pink polo shirts.
It's good. It's looking good. It's looking good. I know Brian asked a great question, is how does image stabilization play into that? Oh, I know what I wanted to say in direct response to you, Steve, is yes, there are times where I've been able to hand hold 1/10 of a second. And then another situation, exact same gear, nope, blurry shot after blurry shot. So what I think people think is that in one situation, it applies to all of them. Man, it depends on how much sleep you've had, how much caffeine you've had, what your footing is like, what is the wind doing, whether or not Toby's standing next to you and blabbing your ear off. I mean, all of those things play into whether or not you're going to be able to get a sharp shot. And I absolutely agree with you, Steve. Anytime it's critical, you follow that rule of thumb. Brian asked a great question of how does image stabilization play into this? Typically, image stabilization in most lenses gives you about 4 stops of kind of cheat that rule. And remember, most of our cameras, 1 turn of the dial is 1/3 of a stop. So that's 12 turns of the dial slower than you should be able to handhold. But again, anytime it is critical to get a sharp shot and you're hand holding, you should follow the rule. Trust me, as Steve said, it's just not worth it. It's not worth it.
Yeah, there's a couple of good comments coming in here. And you talked about all the different factors, and then Angela Redmond mentioned the neck strap. Yeah, that is a factor as well. You might tug on that. And, you know, things like in-body stabilization, just make sure that you're using it to enhance what you know, don't use it as a crutch. And I say that because I literally have seen it multiple times on tours where people just say their image stabilization is going to take care of it. And you might think I take pleasure out of proving them wrong later on in the tour, but I don't at all. It crushes me because I'm like, we've been shooting for 3 days and you've sworn up and down that you don't need any help with how to hold your camera or to watch your shutter speed. And now it's the end of the tour and we're looking at your pictures and I'm zooming in and they're blurry, you know, yeah.
I got a tip for you, Steve. You just got to stop caring. You care too much. Just stop caring.
Oh man. If I just stopped caring, I wouldn't be out touring.
I know. So tell me, Steve, let's say, you can't handhold. You want to talk a little bit about tripods?
Yeah. So my business, I pretty much live on a tripod when it comes to architecture and real estate photography. Virtually everything I do is on a tripod. Just a couple things to really remember. Well, first of all, learn to use your tripod. That's huge. We talk about that all the time at the start of tours. But I won't really get into that. There's tutorials on all this stuff, but using your tripod, remember to turn your stabilization off. Most of us have like lenses that have a stabilizer, if it's a long lens especially. Turn that off, because what happens is your camera is now stable on the tripod if you've set it up properly, and it's going to try and stabilize, which causes movement. You can actually see the lens kind of going back and forth, and that creates blur while you're on the tripod. So it works against you. So turn the stabilization off while you're on the tripod. Make sure that more than anything, when you work on a tripod, if you need to move something, you got to loosen something. A tripod is meant to lock everything down. So don't try to force move something. Just got to loosen something if you want to move something. Not that that's going to get you a sharper shot. Just please remember to do that. Don't break your equipment. There's good alternatives out there. It took me 2 years, but I finally went and spent the money on a platypod. Mm-hmm. And here I am giving this whole dissertation about being humble, and I literally didn't buy this product because I thought the name was stupid. But Toby has brought this on trips, and each time he breaks it out, and I'm having trouble, finding the right spot to put my platypod or my tripod, or a tripod isn't allowed, he busts out this platypod, which, by the way, don't think that escaped me. Why did you just smell your platypod?
Oh, you could see that, but nobody else could. Steve! Well, it's still wet with bits of seaweed on it from where it was yesterday. If you, it's 3:15. I think I can't remember what time I arrived yesterday. Watch my stories to see that whole kind of total failure yesterday.
Oh, I did see that with the Sony.
Yeah, I don't count a total failure because it was a learning experience, but I did not get what I wanted. So it happened. I just pulled it out of the bag. It's been sitting in the bag, wet, with Puget Sound water all over it. So yeah.
Well, platypod is one tripod alternative. Bracing yourself against something. I know we shoot the slot canyons on the Southwest tour, and I always encourage people, like, brace yourself up against the wall and put your arms there and really just kind of create a stable environment for your camera as much as possible. That's an alternative to the tripod. Lori Myers had a quick question about the longest lens you could use on something like a platypod. It really kind of depends on your ball head. So I've got a platypod. I've got a Really Right Stuff BH55 ball head. That is a super heavy duty ball head. I would have no problem putting a 100 to 400 lens on that, and it would be stable as long as I've secured the platypod with their straps, or it's on solid ground or something like that. So it kind of just comes down. I don't know what the actual recommendation is, but it really kind of depends on the ball head that you're using, and you use your own ball head for the platypod.
If you use a tripod collar so that it's balanced better, you know, with a longer lens like the 100 to 400, I've put the 100 to 400 on a platypod. Again, it depends on how you have it set on the ground, and as Steve said, the ball head.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, all that is to say that, you know, if you hold your camera, you learn what you're actually capable of, take into consideration your lens stabilization or your in-body stabilization, whatever, while you're on a tripod, and then locking things down, learn how to use your tripod. And the shutter speed that Toby was talking about, those things right there, I guarantee you will get you more consistent, sharp shots. And Toby, I know there's a trick that you are getting down to.
Sorry.
I wish you guys could see what I'm seeing here. There's a trick that you have when you start getting into some slower shutter speed and your hand holding about burst shooting.
Yeah, shooting a burst. And, you know, again, I want to go back to my opening statement, or it wasn't my opening statement, but not the bag of worms. But anytime it matters, I make sure I follow the rule. But every once in a while, you get that safety shot, which is a Tuesday tip I wrote a while back. Then go ahead and try at the slower shutter speeds, and shooting a burst can help, because if you shoot a burst at 1/10 of a second, you might get one in there where you didn't move, and your subject is sharp. All of this, of course, goes out the window if you've got a moving subject. Then you need to start talking about what shutter speed should you be to freeze your subject, if that's your desire. And again, there was a Tuesday tip about that not too long ago with a nice little printable chart. And actually what we're going to start doing, I told David I was going to do this last weekend, I haven't done it yet, is if you sign up for the Photo Enthusiast Network, the free 10-day trial, you get our great little exposure guide that we've put together that explains shutter speed, aperture, and ISO with tons of other tips, and has that shutter speed chart in it. It's a downloadable PDF available to you. You get to keep free, of course, even if you don't continue on with the trial. So consider that.
Yeah.
One more point I'm going to make quickly. Another big one that we hear often with the whole kind of sharper images thing is focus points. Our recommendation in most cases is you're working with one decently sized focus point, because we have to say that these days with mirrorless, you can change the focus point. Don't make it its smallest. Don't make it its biggest. Kind of in the middle usually is the sweet spot, I find. And you move that around and put it on your subject. Don't think if you have all of your focus points working that you're going to have the most in focus. You ever heard people say that, Steve? I've got all my focus points on, so it'll all be in focus.
Yeah. Yeah,
it doesn't work that way, folks. Your camera is still only, it might light up multiple ones, but your depth of field, how much is in focus, is always controlled by your aperture and your focal length and your distance to subject. So, but the best way to make sure your subject, what you want to be in focus, is for you to put that little focus point on that subject and take your picture. I think that's all I'll say about that now. As I said, we'll elaborate more on this in a full video soon. If you've got other suggestions, I probably already have them on this list, but I'd love to see chat room as we start to wrap this show up. Feel free to throw your other suggestions in the chat. Also, we're about to hit a couple other news stories. If you want to look in more detail at any of these things, thanks to Roy for putting all that together. You can find it at photorec.tv/MMH. That stands for Mish Mash Highlights. That's linked right down below this video. We're going to move on as we start to wrap this show up. And there's some really cool articles that I just want to tease. One is Forbes has a discussion article about how much photographers make in every state. So if you are a serious photographer trying to make a living at this, You can see whether or not you should be depressed. And you live in Iowa. It's not so good in Iowa. Arizona, ooh, even worse. But Massachusetts, hey, not bad. So you could go take a look at that article. There is this one, and Roy posted this in our community group the other day. A woman photographed her very own childbirth.
Oh, I saw that.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Now, she could be related to this woman. This is totally aside, but I heard this the other day. There is a woman who genetically does not feel as much pain as your average person, and also doesn't experience fear or anxiety as much as the other person. And they've actually kind of linked it to a certain set of chromosomes that she has in her genetic makeup. And she described childbirth in the article as a bit of a tickle. Wow. She also heals fairly quickly too. It's very interesting. So not to take anything away from this woman, but maybe she has some of those chromosomes. Who knows?
You know what? If that's you, if you have that superpower, you might want to just kind of keep it to yourself. Because you get out there and you say that, and all the millions of women who are have given, and will give childbirth hear something like that. Like, you just sound like a jerk.
Yeah. She actually said, it's really interesting. It's a New York Times article. She actually said, I really thought women were kind of making a bigger deal out of this than otherwise. Here's how they discovered that she had this, though. She came in for a hip replacement, and they're like, the way your hip is, this should be incredibly painful. You shouldn't be able to walk. But she was like, no, it doesn't really hurt. It's just not supporting me anymore. It wasn't working. It didn't hurt. So, and she apparently burns herself all the time and doesn't feel it. And her husband says, is her flesh burning? That's so it's kind of wild.
His point is well taken. The part of our brain. I sold pain meds for a lot of years, so I'm pretty intimately familiar with that. But there's also that part of our brain that we need to use that is kind of that like emotional intelligence with the audience around you. And I know many times on this show, you guys probably think that mine has lapsed and I don't use it. Which might be the case from time to time. I will definitely admit that. But
yeah.
I will say though too, like, I'm a professional photographer. I love taking pictures. It's a career that I've chosen. I was doing okay in the corporate world and I wanted to do this. However, I'll be the first person to tell you that there are times in this life when you need to put the camera down. And we even talk about this on our trip sometimes. Like, sometimes you just need to experience the moment. I love the scene in Walter Mitty. If you guys haven't seen that movie, it's one of my all-time favorite films where Sean Penn says he's finally seeing this it's like a white tiger or something like that, snow leopard. And hopefully I'm not spoiling the film for you guys, but Ben Stiller says, well, aren't you going to take the shot? And he says, sometimes I don't. Sometimes the camera is just a distraction. And I wholeheartedly believe that. I take pictures for a living, but I'll be the first person to tell you that, like, you're giving birth? I don't know. Have somebody take pictures for you.
That's a good point. But as Lori points out, men should be very careful in talking about childbirth. So let's just finish up with that and say, yes, maybe make sure you're experiencing the moments, but no judgments there. Let's move on. It's a great segue to talk about a hole. The first time this hole or a hole like it, a hole.
By the way, I hope Caleb is still on here. I was just making some jokes in the chat room about this. He said in a Facebook post that if we weren't going to talk about this photograph, I think we're referring to the same picture, then he wasn't even going to watch the show. So this is for you, Caleb.
Yeah, and this is where I lean into the microphone and I say, photos from space, because we always have that segment in the show. And God, I should have photoshopped like a picture of you, Steve, and then been like, this is a hole, but I don't have time for that stuff. So I'm just going to show everybody, this is the world's first photo of a black hole. Now, this is pretty wild. This is not a photo taken with typical equipment. This was taken by using a network of radio telescopes all over the globe, all pointed in the same direction, all capturing the same radio wavelength. So this isn't visible to the human eye in this respect, but that dark bit at the center, that's a hole. And the glowy bits around it, that's plasma being pulled in towards that hole. And here is what is I think the most wild about this. It is the hole itself is 6.5 billion times the size of our sun. Let's just sink that. Let's let that sink in for a second. It's nuts. 6.5 billion. It could, our whole galaxy, or sorry, yeah, no, our whole solar system could fit in there. Whole solar system. It's just pretty wild. I think there's Veritasium is a YouTube channel that's really cool. I like a lot. They have a really kind of neat description about this in more detail. But this is the very first time that has ever been captured. And that's our photo from space. We got a couple of quick questions, and I just want to say, if you've been watching the show this long, make sure you hit that thumbs up button. And if you're not already a subscriber, you gotta hit the subscribe and the little bell notification as well. And of course, you should check out the free 10-day trial Photo Enthusiast Network. Let's hit a couple of quick questions. First one from Chuck for me. Will I be installing the latest firmware 3.0 for the A7R3 and the A7 III, or will I wait for it to age a bit? Well, Chuck, if I was a smart guy, I would wait for it to age a little bit, but I will tell you, as soon as that drops, and I maybe can or can't tell you that it'll be extremely, extremely soon, I will be installing it the second available. For those who don't know, this is a firmware update coming from the A7 III and the A7R3 that enables the real-time subject tracking and IAF always, if you want, and cat and dog AF. IAF.
Now, okay, so why is it cat and dog autofocus and not just animal autofocus?
Well, that's the thing, and I may or may not be able to share that I learned this recently, but at the beginning, it will just be cat and dog that it works reliably on, but there will be updates down the road that will include additional animals like your pet goldfish.
Okay.
So it does feel a little disingenuous. What I remember Sony, the image that was shared around the most, last summer when they shared this, was an owl. That's what I remember seeing, and that seems a little far away. And I don't even know for sure that that will even ever come to the A7R3. They might just be like, cat and dogs, all you A7R3 users get, and the A7R4, you know, or the A7 IV, you'll get the other animals. I don't know. Maybe, maybe not.
We're going to throw in a wildebeest for this model, and you know, maybe a crocodile and a platypus.
Sounds good.
Sorry, we're talking about the platypod, so just the mind kind of went there. But
yeah. So
sounds like a marketing. It sounds like a marketing tactic.
Yeah, but I am excited for it. You know, I've got 2 dogs, 3 eyes between them. So I'm excited to go test it out on their eyes the moment that becomes available. And maybe I'll wander around in our neighborhood. We do have a couple of cats nearby. I'll see if I can get them to come and let me take pictures of them.
Oh, so, you should see if it works on Archer's artificial stick-on eye.
That's a good question. I gotta find those.
They also need to update their do a firmware update so that it can capture artificial eyes. You know, plastic 99-cent store stick-on eyes.
that could be some fun. That could be some fun stuff to try. Just Kyle wants us to talk about the different case modes in Canon's AF menu. He's working with the 5D Mark III. It's hard to find much info on them. Oh, that's a good question.
Explain to me the case modes. What are we talking about?
So I don't have any of the camera that would have that in here at all. The EOS RP does not. It is when you get into that sub autofocus menu, you kind of have the subject tracking. Basically, you have decisions to make over how well you want it to stick to a subject, how erratic that subject might be moving. You're moving little sliders to kind of help the camera decide how fast and how much it should stick to one subject versus switch off and follow another subject. That's what you're helping it see there.
Oh, okay. Well, in that case, I'm going to piggyback on Just Kyle's question and say, yeah, Toby, tell me about this.
Yeah, I should dig that up. You still have a 5D Mark. You have a 5D Mark IV available to you.
Yeah, I don't know if my battery is.
Real quick, while you're working on that, let me see. David has a question. Best travel lens for the Panasonic G7 for city and landscape. He's off to Japan for a week. He's only got his kit of 12 to 60. I'm guessing I'm asking, do I need a prime? Do you need a prime? No, the 12 to 60 is a very nice. That's equivalent to like a 24 to 120 lens. It's a very nice general walk around lens. If you want, I think in Japan, I think of some really fun street scenes, especially after dark in the lower light. And so you could go with something like the simple little 25. It's not within reach. That's a great little lens. They've got some pancake lenses that are going to make this portable camera already even more portable that you could consider as well. If you want some direct links with a little bit more thought about it, David, feel free to send me an email, toby@photorec.tv, and I can link you to a couple. But you're also fine with the 12 to 60. So don't stress about it.
Just to circle back around, this is my 5D Mark III that was up in my cabinet. My Mark IV, all that gear is in my backpack from a recent real estate shoot. So I don't have quick access to that. So
okay.
I'm not able to look up those menu items and help you out with that. Just Kyle.
Yeah.
But I don't know how much of a help I'd even be, because that's kind of next level autofocus stuff that I've never really played around with.
Yeah, honestly, I haven't either. I've left it on the default settings, but I haven't, shot a lot of serious sports with it. But let's talk a little bit more again, Kyle. Well, I think you're a PIN member. Post in the group, and we can work through some discussions about that in a little bit more detail.
Yeah, and I'd love to kind of keep up on that and hear a little bit more about it, because I'd like to put some of that to practice.
Yep. Andrew M wants to look for an easy way to take a self-portrait without a mirror or flip out screen. And the easiest answer, I think, is to use the Wi-Fi to remote. Almost all cameras offer that these days. So you can just download the app on your phone and pull it up. Or if you don't have Wi-Fi remote in the camera, almost all cameras support some kind of tethering with live view. So you could stick it into, you might have to use the camera's own software, Canon and Nikon, but you can plug in a little cable and get a live view of what it sees. So you could set your laptop or your computer there and then have your camera pointed at you and help you frame it. That's not really a mobile friendly solution, but it would certainly work.
Or do it like we did it for years. Set it on a tripod or a countertop or something, point it in the right direction, and use your 10-second timer. Go sit in front of the camera and smile big. Say cheese.
Yep, that's a good point. And a lot of cameras even will let you take a couple of shots in succession, so you could try that as well. Yep. Just Kyle followed up. I just want to say, you know what? We should ask Roger about this, because he's really talking about birds in flight. And I think Roger, with his Canon cameras, might be a good resource to ask to see if he has tweaked any of those settings. 7D Mark II is what he mostly shoots with, but I believe they have very similar settings to the 5D Mark III.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. I think we're done. I don't think there's anything else to talk about. We wrapped up this whole bag of worms. We're all done with it. We're going to go eat some good barrels of apples now. And what other good sayings do you have from Tennessee, Steve?
What was one I heard the other day? I've been as busy as a three-legged cat in a sandbox, something like that.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good.
The guy that I work out with at the gym, he's born and raised here, and it's torture, because I'll be like mid-lift and he's spotting me and he'll say something in his southern accent, and it just makes me laugh. And I practically drop the weights half the time. So I'll have to start recording Wade.
Sounds pretty good. Sounds pretty good. I teased this a little bit. I don't think I really said we're going to talk much about it, but this is the RX0 Mark II. And it looks kind of like a GoPro, but it's got a 1-inch sensor in here. And I'm pretty impressed with it. And the little flip up screen, kind of ridiculously small, but really impressive image quality, useful for vlogging, useful for underwater. It's not a super wide angle lens. It's 24 millimeters, actually a 35 millimeter equivalent. I'm going to take this to New Zealand. So Steve,
I was going to ask if you were going to take that with your selfie stick to New Zealand.
That's right. That's right. I'm all about selfie. Well, they included, it doesn't come with this, but you can buy this and get a little discount. The shortest selfie stick on earth. Here it is. And I really wish, though, you know, obviously battery life isn't great.
Is this like a DJI Osmo competitor now or something?
It doesn't really have that stabilization. It is kind of like a high-end GoPro. I think that would be the best way to describe it. You know, it is going to give you much better image quality in a lot of situations than a GoPro. Oh, Adam wanted us to talk about that. Adam, I'll have to just email you a little bit more about GoPro. But I really wish they'd put a battery in this grip as well, and then you could power it while you're talking and holding it, because that would make a lot more sense to me. This brand new one they sent me has got a few scrapes. Maybe some dummy put it in the water and then let waves wash all over it and hit the rocks.
Yeah, and tripped over his own fishing line.
Oh, boy. Oh, boy. On that note, we're tripping over our own fishing line, pulling the plug on this show. Steve, hey, thank you. Thanks for hanging out with us on this Wednesday afternoon. I appreciate it.
It's been a real bag of worms hanging out with you today.
Now we don't even know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. We'll let you, chat room, decide. Let us know if you're watching this after the fact. Leave a comment down below. What's the best saying in your neck of the woods? And
you stay classy, San Diego.
All right, everybody. We will see you next week, I think. Same time, same place. I'm excited. Bye-bye.
Wait a second.
What?
Next week is what day of the week is Wednesday?
The 22nd. Oh, are you Oh, no. Wait, I'm looking at May. Hold on. 17th.
Oh, yeah. Nope, we're good. It's the following week. I'm leaving a little early for New Zealand, coming out to stay with some friends in Sacramento. So
sounds good. All right. So we will see you next week. Bye, everybody. Have a great one.